Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is Monatui, coach of the Tampa Bay Luxrays, and today I'm super excited to bring you guys the GBA Season 7 draft analysis for the Tampa Bay Luxrays. If you guys don't know, or for somehow not aware, Tampa Bay Luxrays are back in the GBA, and I am super excited to finally go into the GBA with a team that I built myself. Having my own thought process, being able to determine each individual mon that I wanted, being able to get synergies that I liked, being able to get mons that I'm more comfortable with, all of that. And I am super excited to go into what I actually decided to pick up in comparison to everyone else. So with that being said, let's just jump into it. Real quick, just so that some people understand who may not have been following the GBA up until this point, we did away with tier systems just for the season, just because they were all new mons, and in order to redo all the tiers would take a while, especially in order to do it properly. It would take a little while, and the majority coaches just wanted to go back to having a tierless draft, just kind of a little bit for nostalgia's sake, but again, mostly because it would be a lot easier, so that we can have more time to think about tiers for seasons in the future. So with that being said, let's just jump into the first mon that I decided to pick up. I ended up being somewhere around the middle of the draft, because if draft order is actually determined by where you finished last season, because I finished right around in the middle, my pick ended up being in the middle. A couple coaches dropped and we had to replace them, so they ended up getting pushed to the bottom and I moved up a little bit, but for the most part I was still in the middle, which is not the best place to be. I prefer being closer to the beginning or end so that you get closer to that wheel pick. However, it's not the worst thing in the world. You can still definitely pick up mons that you want to get. So I actually decided to, for my first round pick, get a Pokemon that I think is extremely good in the format. It was very good in Gen 6 draft format, and I still think it is extremely, extremely good in Gen 7. And this is a Pokemon that I have always really wanted to use. I've been destroyed by it multiple times. I've been hacked out by it multiple times. It's genuinely, I think, one of the top 5 best Pokemon in draft format at this current state of the meta, and that Pokemon is Jirachi. So, Jirachi, I'm sure you guys know plenty about it if you've been following draft format for any amount of time at all. The nickname it has, 0.3%. If you guys don't know why it's nicknamed that, let's take you back to last season in our game versus Envy, where his Jirachi crit parried and full parried my Azumarill with a Thunderbolt. And the chance of that happening was 0.3%. That is not 3%, not 3 out of 100, that is 3 out of 1,000. 0.3%. 3 times in 1,000 that will happen. Just so happened to happen in that exact moment. So yeah, we picked up Jirachi round 1, which I was really, really happy about because I absolutely love this thing. I firmly believe that Jirachi is easily in the top 5 Pokemon in draft format. It's right up there with Manaphy, with Mew, with Victini, with Tapu Bulu, with all of those things. I think it is right up there. I was actually initially going to grab Tapu Bulu, but that got taken by John right before me, so I decided to go with Jirachi, and I'm equally as happy with Jirachi. Because even though it is an old Pokemon from previous generations, it's new to me. I have never drafted this thing in a league before, but I do know exactly how it works. It is extremely versatile, it's very unpredictable, and even if I decided to run like the standard bulky or the standard scarf set with Iron Head, it's still going to be able to put in a lot of work, because with that 60% chance to flinch with Iron Head due to Serene Grace, you always have a win condition. No matter how down I am in a game, if I am just able to flinch everything, which has happened to some people, then I'll be able to pull back that game. The Jirachi is genuinely one of the most annoying Pokemon in the format, not just because of its ability to flinch everything down, but because of the fact that it is so unpredictable. This thing has a great physical move pool, it has a great special move pool, it's an excellent Z-move user, which I'll get into in a little bit. We were allowed to pick one Z-mon Pokemon, and or one mon that can use Z-moves, and Jirachi's very good at doing that. It gets access to Thunderbolt, Icy Wind, obviously Stab Psychic and Iron Head, and Flash Cannon. It also gets very powerful Doom Desire, which is really cool. It gets access to things like Moonblast, Drain Punch, Play Rough. It has excellent coverage. It can gain Initiative with U-Turn, and like I said, it can just flinch things down with Iron Head or Zen Headbutt / Heart Stamp. It's just such an incredible Pokemon. Its typing is great. It's a Steel type that's able to take fighting hits neutrally, which is really nice. It obviously has the ability to run Colbur Berry, which will allow it to take Dark type attacks such as Knockoff a lot better. It has some crucial resistances, being Grass and Ice, as well as a quad resistance to Psychic, as well as being a mon that is very good at checking and switching into Fairies, which are very prominent and very scary in Draft League play. So That's Jirachi. As you can see, obviously, it's got base 100 stats all around. I think you're very familiar with that by now. So it can be run bulky, it can be run offensive, it can be run bulky on both sides, and it can be run offensive on both sides. And that's one of the things that just makes Jirachi so, so good. And like I mentioned earlier, you, as a GBA coach, you are allowed to designate one mod who is allowed to run any Z Crystal that it wants to run, except for Z attacks that give you the Omni boost. So things like Z Conversion that give you +1 in every stat, those you're not allowed to use, but other than that, you are allowed to use any other Z move on your Pokemon. And I selected Jirachi because you get boosted attacks such as like All Out Pummeling, which can boost fighting type attacks, which can be really nice. You get Twinkle Tackle on the fairy side, or for the fairy typing, because you get Play Rough and Moonblast. I can even run like a boosted Doom Desire and get a ridiculously powerful steel attack. I think like a 200 base power steel attack, which is crazy. And I don't 100% like understand how to prep with Z moves, but I can absolutely figure that out. And I know they're new to everybody, so everyone's going to struggle with that a little bit. And hopefully I'll be able to become ahead of the curve and understand when it's appropriate to use a Z Crystal and when not to use a Z Crystal. Because also, the nice thing about Z Crystals is they cannot be knocked off. So I'll be taking a little bit less damage from knockoff. So it'll be kind of like I'm running a Cobra Berry. I won't be taking as little of damage as I would on the first turn, but knockoff's power will be weakened in case I want to run a Z Crystal. In case I want to run an item, but I don't want to run Cobra Berry, I can run a Z Crystal, use that Z Crystal to get a powerful attack and take knockoffs, which are very nice. But yeah, one of the better Z move uses, I think, because you get like Bloom Doom and you get like whatever the Ice Z move is. The Jirachi, great Pokemon. Absolutely love this thing. I'm really, really happy to have it, and I think it's genuinely one of the best Pokemon in the entire format. So with that being said, that's our round 1 pick. We're now going to move on to our round 2 pick. And this is a Mon, the first Gen 7 Mon that I'm picking up this draft. And this is the Mon that I was looking at, and I was actually kind of surprised that it made it back to me, just because it's a new generation and there are a lot of new toys out there that people are going to want to grab very early. So I was very happy that this ended up making it to me. And the round 2 Pokemon that I was able to pick up is actually Buzzwole. So as you can see, you got a Buzzwole in front of you, named Ivan. No real reason, it just looks buff and it flexes a lot, and Ivan is like a stereotypical like buff Russian dude name. So we got Ivan here. Great stats all around until you get to the bottom 3. So basically, great stats up above on the top half of that. HP 107, attack 139, defense 139. This thing hits like a truck and it takes physical hits like it's nobody's business. Buzzwole is, I think, bulkier overall than Skarmory on the yeah, it's very much bulkier than Skarmory on the physical side. It obviously doesn't have the typing that Skarmory has, but for natural raw bulk, this thing is more physically defensive than Skarmory, which is absolutely incredible. This thing can take physical hits like it's nothing. Unstab Aerial Aces, even some unstabbed Brave Birds, are not going to be able to knock out this thing at all. It is insanely bulky. On top of that, you also have a 139 attack stat, which goes up to over 400 at level 100, even though we're playing at level 50. It is very, very powerful, and you get a very powerful fighting move in the form of Superpower, and you get access to the newly buffed Leech Life, which is now base 80, a base 80 physical bug type attack, which is really, really nice because that gives you basically a stronger Drain Punch. I think bug coverage is not quite as good as fighting coverage, so Drain Punch would be a little bit better, but you still do get that recovery attack in Leech Life, which can be very, very useful. It also has just an excellent move pool. It gets access to, I believe, most, if not all, of the elemental punches. I know it gets access to Ice Punch, Thunder Punch, as well as Poison Jab, so it has ways to hit fairies, it has ways to hit flying types, it has access to Stone Edge to hit those bulky fire types like Arcanine, or even like the fire flying types, like if you see like a random Talonflame or something like that, even though there aren't too many of those, and I don't know if anyone actually drafted that. I can hit something like Volcarona very hard, be able to knock that thing out, whereas its other stabs resist. It gets access to Earthquake as well to hit some bulky fire types as well as whatever its other coverage can hit, and Earthquake is always just very nice coverage to have. Those are obviously its strengths. It does come with its own weaknesses. Obviously, the 4x weakness to flying is a little bit unfortunate because with a relatively low special defense stat in 53, Hidden Power Flyings will be able to knock this thing out, even though it does have very high HP in 107. Its special attack is pretty much useless. 53 is not really good enough to run special attacks, and then its speed is mediocre at best. Being base 79, it will be able to outspeed some nice things such as like Breloom and Bisharp and things like that, as well as like anything that is base 75 or higher. such as like Absol or anything along those lines. It'll be able to outspeed, but not being able to outspeed base 80s is kind of unfortunate. You're going to have to run the Choice Scarf on this thing. Maybe more than you would want to in order to really sweep teams, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a sweeper. This thing can just be an absolute tank. It can be an absolute wall breaker. It can do anything like that. It is a very good substitute user as well because it has over 100 HP at 107. You can run a lot of HP on this thing and make it so that Seismic Toss cannot break your sub, which is very nice. This thing can set up subs versus a lot of different physical attackers, especially things that resist are not going to be able to break this thing's sub at all. Like, this thing can switch into Leaf Blades just fine. Can switch into some, like I said, just weaker attacks. If a Pokemon goes for priority, attempting to hit you before they go down, like suppose it's, I don't know, let's say it's like a Lycanroc that you're going up against, and you go for sub as they go for Accelerock, the Accelerock will hit you, it'll do very minuscule damage, and then you'll be able to get your sub up, meaning that they're then forced to go for something like a Stone Edge, possibly miss, and then you're going to be able to knock them out with a Leech Life, getting your HP back, and still having a sub intact. Also, this thing gets access to Focus Punch, making it a very, very good sub Focus Punch user, because like I said, it's very easy to get up a sub with this thing. You get up a sub, you hit something with a base 150 base power stab fighting move that will be hurting whatever is in front of it. So Buzzwole is a really, really cool Pokemon. I understand why it didn't go round 1 because the 4x weakness does turn people away, plus the fact that it's relatively slow. It can be revenge killed by special attackers relatively easily. That being said, it's great against physical attackers. It hits like a truck, and its typing is actually decent defensively. Like, it has crucial resistances in things like Bug, in things like Dark, which is really nice. It's a great knockoff switch in, assuming I'm okay with losing my item. And even though its special defense is relatively low, its very high HP stat kind of makes it tolerable. Some weaker hidden power flyings are not going to be able to knock this thing out. So Buzzwole, a really good pick on its own. Also, something really nice is paired with Jirachi, those two kind of synergize very nicely together. One of the things that Jirachi doesn't really like to deal with is bulky steel types, whereas Buzzwole can come in on a lot of those bulky steel types and just take care of them. Like, even something like, even though they're not allowed in this season, just for an example, Mega Aggron, Jirachi can't really do anything to, and Mega Aggron is going to be able to deal with it with Earthquakes or even Fire Punches. You can send in your Buzzwole on something like that. Take the Fire Punches or Earthquakes, no problem. Even Fire Punches will do like 30% or something along those lines, and then immediately threaten it out with a very powerful fighting move. I guess something else that could be an example, something along the lines of Registeel. Jirachi can't really deal with Registeel, it can't poison it, but you can always send in your Buzzwole on the Registeel, take the Seismic Toss. If that's its best move to hit you, you can sub up for free on that thing. It's gonna have to run a special attack in order to break your sub. And even then, you're still going to be able to hit that thing with a very powerful fighting move. So those two really cover each other's weaknesses very, very nicely, because also obviously Buzzwole is weak to Psychic types. If they're a slower Psychic type, Buzzwole can deal with it, but if it's a faster one, like an Alakazam, or like an Azelf or something like that, you can switch into your Jirachi on the Psychic attack and then be able to deal with them via flinching it down with Iron Head, or you turning out into something to deal with that Pokemon. So these two Pokemon synergize very, very nicely together, and I really like the pairing of Jirachi plus Buzzwole. And not only do I think that these two pair very well together, but the Pokemon I decided to pick after Buzzwole, I think also is grouped very nicely with Jirachi and Buzzwole. And that Pokemon is going to be Zygarde 50%. Now, its nickname is actually going to be Improved Snek. Snek is a little bit boring, even though it's accurate because it is a snake thing. Zygarde 50% has been given a really, really solid buff in it being able to access 1,000 arrows. It also gets access to 1,000 waves, which hits an opponent with a ground move and then they're trapped in. However, 1,000 arrows, if you've been sleeping under a rock and you don't know what it does, it hits flying types, which is super, super important, because when you have a ground type that has access to a move that hits literally everything on your opponent's side of the field, that's really good. Some of the biggest reason that Zygarde wasn't very common in OU was because things like Skarmory, or really any flying type, just completely shut this thing down, and they weren't able to, or you weren't able to beat them with this. Like, you absolutely could not touch a Skarmory. If it did not get access to 1,000 arrows in Gen 7, you would not be able to touch things like Celesteela. Pretty much any flying type. You would have to run Stone Edge, and even then, with base 100 attack and how bulky some flying types can be, you're still not doing a lot of damage to them. So the fact that you get a move that can hit every single thing on your opponent's side of the field neutrally, bar some bulky grass types or bulky bug types, that's really good. That being said, some of the positives that this thing had before it even got access to 1000 arrows is the fact that it is so incredibly bulky. 108 HP, 121 defense, and 95 SPDF is incredible. Its stats overall are really nice. If I wanted to, I could even run like a mixed set with Sludge Bomb or Draco Meteor because 81 special attack is usable versus some teams. 95 speed is also really nice. I'll be able to outspeed things like Lucario, like Crocodile. I'll speed tie with things like Kyurem Black and regular Kyurem. And obviously, since I have access to Dragon Dance, I'll be able to boost my speed alongside that. Also, another setup move that this thing gets that is extremely useful is Coil, and Coil boosts my attack, defense, as well as accuracy. Accuracy is usually not as important, but I'm boosting my attack as well as defense, so you can kind of think of it like a bulk up sweeper as well. You can run this thing with a lot of SPDF, be able to take hits very easily, and then just start setting up coils and possibly sweeping through your opponent's team. This thing also doesn't always have to boost its speed because it does get access to priority in extreme speed, which is arguably the best priority in the game. Obviously it doesn't hit anything super effectively, but overall I believe it is the strongest priority, bar like Water Shuriken from Battlebond Greninja, which isn't allowed, so that's not a problem. Also, obviously, Ground Dragon is an amazing typing. Having some crucial resistances, being fire, it's a great fire spam switch in. Even if something is able to burn me with like a Flamethrower or a Fire Blast or even a Will-O-Wisp, I'm commonly going to be running Rest on this thing in order to deal with it, or I can have something Heal Bell it off later on. This is also a very good substitute user because like both other mons that I've drafted, being Jirachi and Buzzwole, this thing has a very high HP stat in over 100, meaning that if I run enough HP, whatever is on my opponent's side of the field will not be able to break my sub with Seismic Toss, which is really nice. So I have three things where mons like Blissey, Chansey, maybe even Registeel, whatever wants to run Seismic Toss, they're not going to be able to touch me if that's their best way to hit me. Like obviously they could be running Ice Beam or Ice Punch, but then they're forcing themselves to run another coverage move, and even that coverage move isn't going to be hitting Zygarde that hard. Because like I said, this thing has absolutely incredible bulk. Ice Punch from a lot of things does not OHKO this thing. There are very few things that can actually OHKO Zygarde with ice moves. If it's stab, it'll usually be able to knock it out, but sometimes it won't. Hidden Power Ice is rarely ever a KO on Zygarde, assuming I'm building a decent amount of SPDF. Same thing even with some unstab Ice Beams. This thing can take a lot of unstab Ice Beams and deal with that Pokemon no problem. I remember in the off-season league, my opponent had a Tyranitar with Ice Beam, and even though they were uninvested, it's still base 100 special attack, it's still a 4 times effective base 90 attack, and it did barely over half. It was barely a 2 KO on something that was 4 times super effective. So I'm able to take on a lot of different attacks, and the best part about Zygarde is that bulk, because I will be able to set up on so many different Pokemon and possibly sweep with it. Whenever my opponent has this, whether it's in a league or whether it's on the ladder, I always am just afraid of this thing, because I have to keep what deals with this thing alive, and sometimes it's very hard to do if my opponent has a very offensive team with, and since I do have Jirachi and Buzzwole, some mons that can force people to sack Pokemon, that's going to be very difficult for my opponent to do. So, that Zygarde, it's such a good Pokemon. Like I said, the biggest thing about this, besides its bulk, is the fact that it does get 1000 arrows, and it can hit literally everything on your opponent's side of the field neutrally, except for some grass types and some bug types. Zygarde can just be so difficult to prep for, because if you prep for the Coil set, you might not be ready for the Dragon Dance set. If you prep for the Dragon Dance set, and you bring like a bulky physical attacker with Ice Punch or something along those lines, if I set up enough coils, you're not going to be able to knock me out with Ice Punch. It's just such a scary Pokemon for people to deal with. It was always kind of annoying, and it was kind of always scary just because it always had the bulk, but now that I don't have to run as much coverage for other things on my opponent's side of the field, it's become that much better. And I think this thing is absolutely worth a round 3 pick. I think this thing is going to be extremely threatening for other people to deal with. But with that being said, that is Zygarde. I'm really looking forward to using this thing in the future. And let's move on to the round 4 pick. So I'm very happy I picked this mon up. It may seem a little bit early to pick this up, but I absolutely love this Pokemon, and I'm very happy that I was able to get it. And the mon we ended up picking up was Roserade. And this may not be quite as threatening as the first 3, or it may not seem quite as threatening as the first 3, but this is a Pokemon I have grown to absolutely love. It is always a mon that when I have to prep for, I realize that I have almost no switch into because its coverage is so good. It can do so many different things for my team. including being a support Pokemon with spikes, T-spikes, even aromatherapy, leech seed, things like that, or it can just be a straight up offensive powerhouse with stab, sludge bomb, giga drain, leaf storm, technician boosted hidden powers, so I basically get access to things like earth power and flamethrower just because I'm getting that 50% boost on all of my base 60 moves, which is really nice. It's a very nice switch into electric types as well. It has 60 HP, which isn't great, but a very high special defense stat in 105. It is very frail on the physical side with only 60 HP and 65 defense. However, it more than makes up for that in the fact that it has good SpDef as well as a very powerful special attack stat. And it has a decent speed tier as well, being at base 90. I'm going to be able to outspeed, obviously, base 80s, so things like Mamoswine I'll be able to outspeed, even though they can hit me very hard with Ice Shard. I'll be able to outspeed things like Nidoking, which is very nice. I'll be able to outspeed things like Absol, like just anything under base 90. That's simple math. I don't think I have to go into much more detail on that. If it's the number says less than 90, I'll be outspeeding it. I'm glad we got that out of the way. Anyway, this, like I said, the big thing that this thing can do for me as well is spikes and T-spikes. I absolutely love being able to have it stack my opponent, and this thing actually gets access to 2 of those, which is very useful, because that means I don't have to spend more money, or I don't have to spend a pick on a mon in the future that I don't necessarily like, but I'm thinking, okay, well, it gives me this type of hazard, so I want to pick it up. I have both of them on this one Pokemon, and even though I'm probably not going to be running both of them at the same time in the same game all that often, the option is there if I want to. Like I said, Roserai's coverage is good enough to the point where it's gonna scare whoever I'm playing. It gets access to, obviously, like I said, Sludge Bomb, Giga Drain, and Leaf Storm and Stab, which are very, very nice. Technician, Hidden Power, so whatever I feel like Roserai doesn't have, I can fill that in. Like, the most common, I think, is Hidden Power Fire. It's able to knock out a lot of things that are weak to it, like its bulky steels, I can hit them very hard. It also gets access to Shadow Ball for some things like Chandelure or whatever ghost types I want to hit. Gets access to Dazzling Gleam to hit certain dark types very hard. Like I said, the support options it gets are Aromatherapy and Leech Seed, which can be very, very useful. It also gets access to Recovery and Synthesis, which can be very useful because, like I said, this thing has a good SpDef stat. I can run this thing bulky if I want to. I can run like Synthesis on that. I can even run Toxic, which will not be able to miss because I'm a poison type. There are a lot of different things Roserade can do, and I'm very happy that I was able to pick up this Pokemon because it also fits with my team very nicely. Like I said, even though I do have Hidden Power Fire, sometimes that's not going to be quite strong enough to deal with some of the bulky steels that I'm going to be facing, so having something like Buzzwole to possibly pave the way for my Roserade is actually very, very nice. So basically, you know, I'm really happy that I'm able to draft 4 Pokemon that are not only very good in their own right, but also 4 Pokemon that synergize very nicely with each other. You know, it's also very nice to have T-Spikes on the field paired with Jirachi, because if I can poison something, or if I can have the ability to poison almost anything on the field, and I have a thing that can flinch things most of the time, that means they're going to be taking the Iron Head damage, and they're going to be taking the poison damage on top of that, making it so that whatever is in versus my Jirachi, even if it's a resist, like if I'm going up against a bulky water type, if they're poisoned and I'm able to flinch them a few times, they're still getting whittled down even quicker than I'll be whittled down if they click Scald on me. Even if they get the burn on me, I'll still be able to get a little bit of Iron Head damage off, and I'll be able to get off the T-Spikes damage. Especially if I'm able to get up 2 layers, then that damage is going to be racking up continuously. And the point I'm trying to make is that I love how well these first 4 picks are going to be able to work together to possibly bring me some wins. And these are Pokemon I definitely know how to use, even though I've never drafted Jirachi, even though I've obviously never used Buzzwole before. I have used Zygarde and I have used Roserade. I have seen both Jirachi and Buzzwole used, and I am pretty confident in my abilities to figure them out and bring the best sets that I can each week that I'm going against people. So that's our Roserade. Very solid addition to the team. Also, I guess I didn't even mention its other ability in Natural Cure. Really, really good bulky water switch in. I can switch into Scalds. If I get burnt, no problem, I switch back out, even though burn was nerfed. It still can be kind of annoying to have like one of your physical attackers burnt, or even a special attacker that you don't really want to be whittled. Like you don't want to lose your leftovers recovery. So I can just switch this thing in, take a Scald, switch out, get rid of it, deal with it later. And like I said, I can get rid of burns because of aromatherapy. But I'm rambling a little bit. Let's get off the topic of Roserade, also named Axel. I'm still rambling. Axel Rose, cool. Next Pokemon. This is a mon that I never expected to get. Before Gen 7, I never expected to ever draft this Pokemon. Certainly not round 5 of a very important draft for a very important team against very good opponents. But due to the kindness that Gen 7 has shown this Pokemon, I am actually really looking forward to using this thing again, even though I do have it in a separate league. This is probably one of my new favorite bulky waters just because of two things that I got, and those two things I will be going over when I reveal the Pokemon. And let's reveal that Pokemon right now. We got Mantine. Now, if you're wondering, if you're just paying attention to this draft and you've never looked at anything related to Gen 7, the reason why Mantine is really good now is because it got a buff in HP by, I believe, 20 points. So it now has 85 base HP. And the big one is now it gets access to Roost, which is huge because it has a really good defensive stat in 140 SPDF, even okay physical defensive stats in 85 and 70, but that doesn't really mean too much if you're not able to replenish your HP, and the only way this thing used to be able to replenish HP previously was by either running a rest set or by switching in a Scald and getting it absorbed via Water Absorb. But now that it actually has access to Roost, as well as the increased HP, this thing is so good. Scald is just spammable, even though, again, Burn was nerfed. Scald can still be very useful, negating other people's leftovers. Also, of course, being able to cripple some physical attackers is always really nice. The added HP makes its physical bulk a lot more viable. It can take on a lot of different threats. It's a very good stop to a lot of different Pokemon. Obviously, it has the 4x electric weakness, but I do have Zygarde to patch that up a little bit, as well as Roserade that does resist, and both of those Pokemon, if you go for an electric move on, like a Thunderbolt on either of those, I will be able to fire off a powerful attack with both of them, or with Zygarde I'll be able to possibly start setting up, and possibly sweeping from there. There are a bunch of things that Mantine can do for my team that I don't currently have. For example, right now, it is a more reliable Scald switching than Roserade, because if I'm a Technician Roserade, I don't always want to be burnt. Also, the big thing that this thing can do is defog for me. If you watch a lot of my games, I don't typically bring hazard removal, but there are absolutely matchups that I see where I will be bringing defog on this thing in order to get rid of certain hazards. And so having a defogger is always nice to have for the option when you need it. It also gets some interesting coverage. Its physical attack's terrible, which is kind of unfortunate because it has some pretty cool physical moves. Like, I know it gets Bullet Seed and Gunk Shot and Earthquake, but because of its poor attack stat, I don't really see myself using it too often. It does, however, get Stab Air Slash, which can be very nice for bulky grass types that want to switch in. It's a very good status inflictor. Toxic is obviously really nice. I can Toxic other bulky waters as they want to switch in, and then possibly switch out later on. It does also get Ice Beam for some things that can do it, so basically the point that I'm trying to make is even though its special attack stat isn't that great, it's not necessarily passive. It does have the ability to roost up, it does have the ability to status things, and it does have the ability to hit things with some sort of powerful moves, being like Scald, Ice Beam, or I can run like an offensive set with Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Air Slash, things like that, which is also definitely viable. It also has a very good ability in Water Veil, not quite as good as Water Absorb because you don't get the HP back, but suppose I'm facing a team with like an Entei or something, I can run Water Veil, switch into the Sacred Fire, and then guarantee myself to not be burnt, which can be very nice. And also because it has Massive Spadef Scald, that can burn me, is going to be doing nothing anyway, so that's something I might consider in some games. And also the other ability that it gets is Swift Swim, which is not really something I expect to use often, if ever, but it's always a scary kind of like random option. Like if I decide that offensive Mantine is just really good against my opponent, I might just run like a Randance Life Orb Mantine, and then how funny would that be to sweep a team with Mantine? You know, again, it's not necessarily a good set, but people are definitely, like 99% of the time, going to be expecting me to bring some sort of defensive supportive Mantine, and then suddenly I whip out like Life Orb, Hydro Pump in the rain. I might be able to throw some teams off and possibly pick up a win because of it. That being said, I don't really expect to use it too often, but Round 5 Mantine. Some people might disagree with it, but I wanted the Defogger, I wanted the ground immunity. This thing fit both of those, plus it's a bulky water, and like I said, this thing has seriously improved from Gen 7, and I have faith that this Pokemon is going to be able to put in a ton of work, because it's just such a good beginning to... It's such a good addition to the current bulky offense that I have, and it's such a good beginning to a wall core that I might be getting later on. So, that's Mantine. Absolutely love this thing. The few times that I have used it in a separate league, I have absolutely loved it. It's very reliable, it's very bulky, and it can be unpredictable with the Rain Dance set, or I can just use it to punish possible rain teams. So that is Mantine. Very happy with this Pokemon, but we are now going to go to round 6, and this is a pick. I was thinking about what I wanted, because I really wanted a fairy, but I also don't like not having a fast thing on my team that can deal a lot of damage, and I was really thinking about what I wanted. And this mod actually came to mind, and I was actually, for one, I was kind of surprised it was even there, because it's weird to see this thing go this long without being picked. But also, this is a Pokemon I felt like, even though I just picked up a water type, I feel like this is something that actually fit very well on my team. It's fast, it has priority, it has initiative, it has a great move pool, and even though it's frail, I have a lot of other bulky options right now to kind of cover that weakness. So I actually decided to pick up Greninja. Now, this is going to be Torrent Greninja. I'm not allowed to use Battle Bond or Protein Greninja, which is very fair because both of those are broken and you should not allow them in your league. But that being said, Captain Ginyu, the Greninja. If you get that reference, you're cool. But Greninja is a very interesting Pokemon. Obviously, like I said, it's pretty frail, 72 HP, 70 defense, 71 SpDef. It's not going to be taking a lot of hits from anything. And even though it's my second water type in a row, that's fine. I'm okay with stacking up types as long as they do very different things, and Mantine and Greninja do very, very different things. Mantine is going to be switching into hits, and this thing is not. They even have some good type synergy, like Greninja's weak to fighting, and Mantine resists fighting. Greninja is weak to Bug, and Mantine resists Bug. I don't want Greninja to take Earthquakes. Mantine can take Earthquakes forever because he's immune to it. And yeah, but like I said, I like having a thing on my team that is fast and can clean up late game. That is exactly what Greninja is going to do. 122 speed is very, very nice. It's going to be able to outspeed things like Alakazam. It can U-turn out. It can U-turn out versus the things that can't 2-hit KO. It has a really, really, really good move pool. Like, obviously it gets Hydro Pump and Dark Pulse for its stab, can run Surf and Scald as well if I don't want to miss. And then it gets things like Ice Beam, U-turn, Gunk Shot, Extra Sensory, Water Shuriken for priority, which was buffed because it's now a special attack. Even though I'm not going to be able to get the boost that Battle Bond Greninja does, it's still a very reliable priority move, being able to hit things relatively hard, and of course it's on the special side, which is very nice. It also gets access to things like Ice Punch, as well as Low Kick if I want to go like a mixed route. Greninja just has a very good move pool. And that's the thing that makes Protein broken, because you get Stab on all of those moves, and suddenly its somewhat mediocre attacking stats become very, very solid, because you're getting 50% more damage on whatever you go for. That being said, 103 and 95 are enough for the things it needs to do. Like, Gunk Shot is going to be able to 2-hit KO pretty much any fairy that I want to, assuming I'm running like a Naive Nature. Ice Beam will be able to 2-hit KO most things that I need, but again, the real drawback of this thing is its frailty, as well as the fact that sometimes it's just going to be lacking the power of stab that it needs. But regardless, Greninja is still on its own just a very solid mon. It's a Psychic Immunity, which is very nice, even though I do have Jirachi that 4 times resists. It deals with some of the things that Buzzwole does not like to deal with. Like, for example, suppose I'm facing an Alakazam, and I make a risky switch from Buzzwole into Greninja. I then have a free Dark Pulse or a free U-turn that I can go for, be able to either gain initiative or possibly knock out a very big threat. And yeah, I don't think there's too much else to cover about Greninja. Like, I think it's been around long enough, and it's been on so many different drafts, that I feel like people are relatively accustomed to what it can do. It has a great move pool. It doesn't hit super hard, but it hits hard enough for the move pool that it has. And the big thing about it that I love for the team is its speed tier. It's going to be able to outspeed a lot of different things. It's going to be able to come in when things are whittled at the end of the game, outspeed everything, and be able to just clean up. And that is something I really, really love to have on my team. That's one of the reasons why I love Mega Lopunny so much. It is so incredibly fast that it can just come in when things are whittled a little bit, just click buttons and then kill everything. And I feel like Greninja, while not quite as good as Mega Lopunny, can do that job still very well. So that's Greninja. Very happy to pick this thing up. Captain Ginyu, like I said, hope you get that reference. And we're going to be moving on to our round 7 pick. And this is a Pokemon, I know I was pretty surprised that some of these other Pokemon were still there, but this is a Pokemon that I seriously did not expect to be there, because at this point it's round 7, I don't have a fairy. I was comfortable getting like not that good of a fairy, like I was okay with like Rabambi, which is still decent, but like not amazing. Or like even a Whimsicott, I'd be fine with doubling up on grass types just to get the fairy, or even like Aromatisse. But this Pokemon was still there, and personally I think this is one of the better fairies in the game, even though there are definitely better. It's still a very good defensive fairy that synergizes with my team too well for me to not pick up. And that Pokemon is Florges, which I was super happy to be able to pick up this late into the draft. Like, round 7 Florges, especially because people love to pick up their fairies early, was something I really was not expecting. It's going to be nicknamed the Fae. That's a Paragon reference. If anybody plays that game, it's like a fairy grass weird thing that is kind of like Tinkerbell, but also looks a lot weirder than Tinkerbell, and it's like a pixie fairy type thing. But that's not important. The important part about this thing is, holy crap, I got this good of a Pokemon round 7, because Florges not only fits my team really, really well, but it's just really good on its own, similar to basically the rest of my team. Being able to pass Wishes into something like Jirachi or something like Buzzwole can be really, really nice, because that means I don't have to run Recovery on either of those. Even being able to pass Recovery or pass Wishes into something like Greninja or even Mantine, if I find it difficult to possibly be able to get off a roost with that thing, can be extremely important. Besides, it's obviously very good utility options such as Wish, Heal Bell, and things like that. It has very good offensive stat. It has a very good offensive stat in 112 special attack, and Fairy Stab is just always very good. Like, if I wanted to, I could just run Specs and hit things with Specs Moonblast, and there are some teams that just don't want to take that. With 75 speed, it's definitely very usable. That being said, it has a monstrous special defense stat, so I'll be able to switch this thing in on most special attacks, which is really, really nice. And one of the things that I like Florges over some other fairies for, like Sylveon and Aromatisse, is the fact that Florges gets access to Synthesis and gets access to a form of instant recovery. Even though Wish Protect is very solid and being able to Wish Pass is always nice, there are going to be some matchups where I'm too heavily pressured to be able to go for Wish. Like, if I expect my opponent to possibly go for a sub, I don't want to go for Protect and waste my turn. I would rather go for Synthesis, get my health back immediately, and then deal with the Pokemon behind the sub. Also, being able to have Synthesis makes this a very good Calm Mind Sweeper as well, because I can run Calm Mind, Synthesis, and then I have two free slots instead of only having one free slot if I were running Calm Mind, Wish, Protect. This thing can function very well as a Calm Mind Sweeper as well. Like I said, Fairy is a very good stab to have. It hits the majority of Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field. Obviously, it has its resistances in Steel and Fire, but you can run something like a Hidden Power Ground in order to deal with him, or sometimes you can run Psychic in order to deal with some Poison types that your opponent might have. You can run Energy Ball. Florges is just a wonderful Pokemon, and it fits the team so well. I'm sticking with the theme of things being bulky, but also things not being passive, which is kind of nice, because I really like bulky offense. If you watch my interview on the GBA channel, you know that I really like bulky offense, and Florges fits this perfectly. Like, I genuinely could not have asked for a better Pokemon at this point. I basically took a risk by letting this thing go for so long, but I figured, like, I would be totally fine with getting a worse fairy, but Florges ended up being there, and I genuinely could not be happier that it was still there, because it's not a price-based system. I don't have to pick this thing up and then be short on funds later on. It's basically a free pickup. Like, I'm able to pick this thing up with absolutely no drawbacks. And that is just something I'm super happy about, because, like I've said a million times, Florges, I think, fits this team perfectly. I have a lot of powerful offense, I have some things that don't get natural recovery, and I have some things that I don't want to waste move slots on recovery a lot of the time, so I have something to recover for them, and that is Florges. And besides that, it does so many other things well. So that's Florges, round 7, amazing. But now it's time to, I think, start digging into some of the lower tiers to start picking up things that I want. I usually like having a normal type on my team because my team is a little bit weak to Ghost at this point. Not super weak, but offensive Ghost is just a very underrated offensive stat. Like, things like Gengar and even like weaker Ghosts like Miss Magius can still be very scary just because Shadow Ball is very good of an attack. So I do like having my normal types. I also needed another Stealth Rocker because I like having multiple Stealth Rockers so that nothing is locked into running Stealth Rocks all the time. And we ended up picking up Amon in the lower tiers, but still Amon that I think is a very, very good value pick for the lower tiers. And we ended up picking up Miltank. So we got Miltank. We also sniped Lars like super hard. Also, because I'm a 12-year-old, this is its nickname. We don't have to focus on that too long, but I am a child, and I hope some of my younger viewers will get a giggle out of this. Also, if you're like me and you're 20 years old and you still giggle at dick jokes, I hope this also gave you a little bit of a laugh as well. But we have Miltank. And this is another Pokemon, I think most people know what it does, but we'll just describe it a little bit. 95 HP and 105 physical defense. Those are pretty good physical defensive stats. That's about as bulky as any of the base 100s, which is really, really nice. 80 attack is kind of weak, but it does have a good enough move pool to kind of make up for that. It also gives access to Body Slam, which has that 30% chance to possibly paralyze my opponent, which is always very nice. Its special defense isn't great at base 70, but with max HP and max special defense, it can be very usable. You can switch this thing into a lot of special attacks. Like, for example, if my opponent has a powerful fire type in, like, Eruption Typhlosion, or, like, even V-Create Victini, this thing will be able to put a good stop to it, even if, whether or not it's physical or special. Also, one thing I really like about Miltank is, despite the fact that I'm generally going to be running this thing defensively, even like fully defensively, it is a very solid speed tat in base 100. Why they decided to give a cow base 100 speed, I will never know, but it does have 100 speed, and I really like it, because a lot of bulky things like to run Taunt in order to stop things like Miltank from spreading status, like Toxic or Thunderwave or things like that. However, with this amount of speed, I will be able to outspeed a lot of those things, be able to get off my status anyway, and then get taunted. So even though I'm still taunted, I can't do much on this turn, or on the turn after I went for my move, I already did my job in being able to status the thing on my opponent's side. Speaking of status, like I said, it does get access to Toxic, as most things do. It does get access to Body Slam for that 30% chance to pair up. It also has access to Thunderwave, which will be able to paralyze things every time I hit it, which will be 90% of the time. Also, if you are new to Gen 7, Thunderwave can miss now. It sucks, but we can deal with it, and I'm very okay with that, because that means Thunderwave, when I'm facing it, is going to be slightly less annoying. But Miltank, like I said, very good status inflictor with Toxic, with Body Slam, with straight up Thunderwave. It's very, very nice. It also gets access to two very, very good abilities, Sap Sipper as well as Thick Fat. Being able to be immune to things such as Spore or Giga Drain or like Stun Spore, any grass move obviously, is really, really nice, because that means I can switch into something like a Sleep Powder from Amoonguss and just absorb it and then have it benefit me because I'm getting up to +1 attack, which is very nice. It gets access to setup in Curse, so if I can run like a specially defensive Curse set with Body Slam and Milk Drink and Curse and then maybe another attack, that'll be really, really useful, because like obviously Curse Snorlax is very, very solid, and obviously Snorlax is way better than Miltank, but I can basically mimic that set and possibly get some success with that. I know it has the potential to beat certain teams. I can also run straight up offensive Miltank if I wanted to. I wouldn't do it often, because like I said, it's kind of weak and I would usually prefer to run the bulky set, but it does, like I said, it does have a pretty good move pool, and if I find the right opportunity, I can run like Banded or Sulk Scarf or something along those lines with like Double Edge and Earthquake and Fire Punch and whatnot. And like I mentioned earlier, a big reason I picked this thing up is because I wanted another Stealth Rocker. Like, Jirachi's a fine Stealth Rocker, but it is way too versatile to ever be locked into having to run Stealth Rock every week, so I wanted to pick up another thing that can use Stealth Rocks. Like I mentioned, I went over Sap Sipper and how useful that can be, but Thick Fat is also extremely, extremely good, because teams with Fire and Ice coverage can be very threatening, and being able to basically resist both of those can be extremely important. Like, I can send this thing in on Ice Beams and Fire Blasts and Flare Blitzes and whatnot, and come out okay, because of the natural bulk that Miltank has, and of course, being able to basically resist both of those attacks. Like I said, Miltank is a relatively low-tier Pokemon. I believe in Gen 6 it was NU, but it has very, very good value for being a relatively low-tier Pokemon. And like I said, if I did not pick this up this round, Lars, who drafted like right after me, would have taken this. So I'm very happy I picked it up when I did. I'm very happy with this Pokemon. It has been annoying to me in the past. I can make it annoying against other people. And I'm really looking forward to using this thing, because even though it doesn't necessarily give off that same threatening appeal that a lot of my other Pokemon have, Miltank is just a very nice fit to my team, and I am very happy to have it, and I hope it can do well for me. So, with that being said, that is our Round 8 Pokemon, Miltank. Stupid nickname, but good mon overall. And with that, we are now going to move on to our Round 9 pick. And this is also a Pokemon that, when tiers come out, I don't expect this thing to be too high, but this is a Pokemon that I love to death. As soon as I saw it being revealed, I wanted it immediately, because I have been looking for a Pokemon kind of like this for a very long time. I did a live with this Pokemon in the very early OU meta, the pre-bank OU meta, and it did fantastic work. And that Pokemon is Alolan Golem. Now, Alolan Golem is not amazing. It also has a stupid nickname in Beauty Balls, because once again, I'm a 7-year-old. Alolan Golem I really, really like. It has a very solid offensive stat in 120 attack, plus it has the ability to run Galvanize, which, if you do not know, is basically like Aerial 8 but for electric type attacks. It gives a 1.2 bonus to normal type attacks, and it makes them electric type. meaning that stab, return, and double edge are made stab, and they're going to hit extremely, extremely hard. It also has a very good defensive stat at 130, paired with an 80 HP stat. This thing is going to be able to take some unstabbed close combats or some weaker fighting moves, as well as just being able to take a lot of physical attacks in general. Its def stat is not very good, and it's most likely going to die to any ground move other than very, very weak earthquakes. But that being said, I do have different things on my team that can kind of deal with ground types. Probably the biggest problem with this thing is its speed. It's only base 45, even at +2, it's still going to be outsped by a lot of different things. But I don't mind that too much, because this adds a very important component to my team. And that is, once again, another Stealth Rocker, so I have now 3 things with Stealth Rocks, which I like to have at least 3. And this also adds an electric type to my team, which I did not have, which is very, very nice, because even though, like I said, it's slow and people generally like to have their fast electric types, I'm okay with having a slower, bulkier electric type. Things like Electros, the Alolan Golem are totally fine for me. And even though it is slow, and a lot of things can knock it out, if I'm facing a slower team, like a slower, bulkier team, this thing can absolutely tear them up. This is also an electric type that is able to deal with other electric types very, very nicely. If my opponent has a Zapdos or a Thundurus and they're not able to knock me out in one hit, I will be hitting them with a super effective Stone Edge and being able to do a lot of damage to them. I also obviously have stab electric coverage, which is also really, really nice when it's paired with the dual stab being rock, because I can hit other electric types or electric immunities with it. Like, for example, if a Jolteon comes in, I can smack that thing with a Stone Edge or an Earthquake if I wanted to, and unless it has HP ground, it's not going to be able to knock me out. Same thing with Tapu Koko even. I can hit that thing with an Earthquake and knock it out if I'm able to survive, if I'm able to take a Thunderbolt or a Dazzling Gleam from it, which I will be able to. This thing also acts as a very good suicide lead, because it gets access to Sturdy as well as Stealth Rock, of course. So I'll be able to go down to my Sturdy, go for my Stealth Rock. Unfortunately, Cut Stab Berry is not released, and I actually just figured that out, but I'm still going to be able to get at my Stealth Rocks guaranteed unless I get taunted, and even then I can run Mental Herb to prevent that. And of course, this thing does get access to Explosion, which on the Galvanized set can be really fun because I'm hitting something with a ridiculously powerful attack, but also on the regular Suicide Lead set, it's very nice because assuming I'm faster than the Hazard Remover on my opponent's side of the field, I will be able to get off a lot of damage to them, as well as blocking the Rapid Spin, or Defog, which is very, very important because if you know me, I do like to keep my hazards up on my opponent's side of the field for as long as possible, or if they're going to be able to Defog or Rapid Spin, I like to punish them when they do that. So Alolan Golem, like I said, it's not an amazing Pokemon, but it did fit what I needed. It gave me another Stealth Rocker. I also haven't even talked about the fact that it gets access to Magnet Pull, which can be very, very useful, because I can trap things such as Celesteela, I can trap things such as Skarmory, and hit them very hard with powerful Wild Charges. I can trap other Steel types and hit them with Earthquakes if I want to. I can trap things like Registeel, like Magneton, like Magnezone, things like that I can knock out with Earthquake or a couple Earthquakes. And if it's something like a Magneton, it won't be able to knock me out with one Flash Cannon unless it's Specs. Same thing with Registeel. I believe I actually live in Earthquake from Registeel just because of my natural physical bulk. So I'm going to be able to get off a lot of damage off onto that Registeel before it's able to knock me out, which sometimes is all I need Alolan Golem to do. That being said, also, I don't think people are going to be prepping with Shed Shell all that often against this thing because it's not like something like a Gothitelle or like a Wobbuffet or a Magneton Magnezone. People don't necessarily expect this thing to be a trapper all the time. And that being said, people also don't expect this thing to be brought all that often because it's not the best Pokemon in the world, but if they do end up bringing Shed Shell, then I'm forcing them to run an item, and if I don't bring a Alolan Golem, then that item is going to be completely useless, whereas something like a Berry or Leftovers could have been much more useful for them. So it's a bit of a mind game there, and I may be able to influence some people's prep with this thing. So that's enough talk about Alolan Golem. Like I said, it's not an amazing Pokemon, but I really like what it does for the team, and it has an awesome beard. So I felt obligated to pick it up just because of that. But with that being said, that's the Alolan Golem, that's our round 9 pick. Now we're going to be moving on to our round 10 pick, and this is another Pokemon that I was kind of surprised was still there, because it's a solid Pokemon, it's got a very solid speed tier, it's seen some use in pre-Bank OU, which was a very scary time for a lot of Pokemon. It's very scary, it's another great Fairy Killer as well, and like I said, it's got a very solid speed tier, and I was looking for something kind of in between that 100 to 120 speed tier, just because I don't want Greninja to be my only fast thing. And I actually was able to pick up very late in the draft, round 10, Salazzle, which I really, really like. We also, its nickname Lacertia? Tia? Whatever. This is a scientific name for lizard, and I'm not smart enough to pronounce it, so I apologize. But we were able to pick up Salazzle, which I think is a really, really cool Pokemon. It's very frail, 68 HP, 70 defense, 60 defense, 60 Spadef. Obviously has a few notable weaknesses in ground and psychic as well as rock, but it does have some pretty important resistances as well, being fairy 4 times, as well as fire, as well as bug, as well as grass, which is kind of cool. Granted, I'm not going to be switching this into a lot, but those resistances are there if I feel risky and I want to switch this in on a weaker hit. Its special attack stat is actually really solid in 111, and with the offensive coverage that it has, being fire poison, that's going to hit most of the opponent's side of the field. Like, obviously steel types are immune to poison, but you're not going to happily switch into your steel type if I go for a fire blast instead. Vice versa as well, you can switch in your bulky fire type, but it's going to probably take Sludge Bomb pretty poorly. Like, even if it's an Arcanine, if rocks are up, I'm definitely 2-KOing you with the Sludge Bomb, or if you're physically defensive, I'm definitely 2-KOing you with a Life Orb Sludge Bomb. It gets access to an extremely good ability and very new ability known as Corrosion, which allows me to poison everything on my opponent's side of the field. And if you know me and how I like to build, I run Toxic on like 3 things on all of my teams. So this pretty much fits that perfectly, because now even the things that are immune to it will be able to be poisoned. If I have a Heatran on the opponent's side of the field, I don't care. I can click Toxic and be able to poison that thing and whittle it down just like I would any other Pokemon. Same thing with any bulky poison type that my opponent might want to switch in. I can just go for a Toxic and whittle them down, whereas no other Pokemon can do that unless you use Soak on them first, which is much, much more rare and much more difficult to pull off, whereas with this thing I can just click Toxic. It gets access to Disable, so I can run like a sub-disable set, prevent them from breaking my sub, and then Toxic whatever wants to switch back in. And even like without the kind of more supportive variant, I can still run this thing as a straight up fast offensive nasty plot sweeper with a Life Orb or something along those lines and do a lot of damage to whatever wants to come in. It's a very fast taunt user. It has some mixed options, but not really with 64 attack. Like, the only one that I think is relatively notable is Knockoff. Like, if I'm facing a Chansey or something and I don't want to go for taunt, I can knock that thing's Violite off, or whatever pre-evolution is on my opponent's side of the field, I can knock it off, which is kind of nice. Its special move pool isn't quite as good as you think it would be, but Fire Poison is almost always exactly what you need. Like, obviously there are some bulky waters that can take on its Sludge Bombs relatively well, but still, like, I have 100% accurate Poison. I have 100% accurate Toxic that can hit anything. So the weaknesses that this thing has can, in a lot of ways, be rectified by the fact that it can just poison whatever's on the other side of the field. Like, if there's a Toxapex on my opponent's side of the field and I know I can't knock it out, I'll just click Toxic and whittle that thing down. Because, like, Toxapex, without Corrosion, Toxapex would be a hard counter to this thing. There's absolutely no question about it. But with Corrosion, I'll be able to plop a Toxic on it, whittle it down, and deal with it in other ways. Also, for some strange reason, this thing gets access to Dragon Pulse. I guess its ancestors were dragons or something, so it kept the move. That's cool. And on top of that, it also gets whatever hidden power you want to run. So if you're not able to hit something with the Poison Fire coverage that it has, you will be able to run hidden power. And like I said, Poison Fire Hidden Power is usually all you're going to need coverage for on this thing. There are obviously some exceptions, but for those exceptions, you can just Toxic them. So that is our Salazzle. That's our round 10 pick. Was very happy to pick this thing up late because, like I said, this is a new toy, and people I thought would be picking things like this up earlier, but fortunately for me, it was not, and that is our round 10 pick. And now, to close out the draft for the Tampa Bay Luxrays of GBA Season 7, I went back up into the higher tiers, and I looked at my team, and I was like, I don't really have a Pursuit Trapper. Nothing on my team is a very reliable Pursuit Trapper. Like, I don't know if anything before this even gets access to Pursuit, but I definitely don't have a reliable Pursuit Trapper, and I was thinking about what I could get. I was looking more in the lower tiers, and then I looked back up, and I realized that this Pokemon was actually still here, and it makes sense that it was still there, because a lot of people don't consider this nearly as good in draft format as it is in Standard, and I would agree with them. But considering it's the literally last pick of my draft, and it's round 11, and it's still there, and I need it, I'm definitely not going to pass it up. So, to finish out the draft for the Tampa Bay Luxrays, round 11, we picked up Bisharp. And you may be thinking, well, I'm doubling up on typings again. I don't care. Doubling up on typings or having multiple mons of the same type is not the biggest deal in the world. Remember, MV had like 3 or 4 water types last season, and he was able to make it to the playoffs, make it to the semifinals against George. And he had a very scary season. He had a very solid season. He was always scary to prep for. He was always scary to play. Not just because he's a good coach, but also all 3 of his water types did something different. We have a steel type in Jirachi. We also have a dark type in Greninja. But I don't care, because this thing is very different from the both of them. Greninja is going to be fast and clean up late game. Jirachi is going to do whatever the hell I want it to do. Bisharp is mostly there for the priority Sucker Punch as well as the pursuit trapping, and it has some other things it can do as well. I can run this thing as a suicide lead as well, just throw his Focus Sash on it, set up Stealth Rocks, go for Taunt on whatever wants to get rid of them. Its dual stab is really solid. It deals with fairies offensively very nicely with Stab Iron Head. Also, it gets a very powerful knockoff, and like I said, it does get Stab Sucker Punch priority. Even though Sucker Punch was nerfed, it's still very strong on Bisharp. It can be a Swords Dance sweeper. Like I said, Sucker Punch can be very difficult to deal with, and being able to boost that means that I'll be able to pick off a lot of different Pokemon. It's pretty frail. It's very frail on the special side with 65 HP and 70 SpDef, and it has okay defense at 100, but I'm still not going to be switching this into a lot of hits anytime soon. Also, its speed stat at 70 is not great. Like, a lot of different things will be able to outspeed me and just hit me with a fighting move and kill me. However, that is what Sucker Punch is there for, and like I said, the biggest thing I wanted this thing for was Pursuit. It has many other options besides Pursuit, but being able to have a reliable Pursuit Trapper in order to straight up stop those bulky Psychics for my Jirachi, straight up stop those bulky Psychics for my Buzzwole, and just going for a Pursuit and trapping them and getting chip damage off onto them, that can be very important. I'm also a very big fan of the Scarf set with Stone Edge, because I'm going to be able to outspeed a lot of flying types that may want to hit me with a Heat Wave, and I'll be able to hit them with a very powerful Stone Edge before they are able to hit me, which can always be very important. I don't think I have to go into too much detail about Bisharp. It's a solid Pokemon. It's relatively one-dimensional, but I think I'm good enough of a player where I can see a couple different sets that this thing can do and bring them in different games. Like I said, it does have the Scarf set. It has some fun gimmick options like Thunder Wave and Rock Polish. Also, if you're wondering about the nickname, it's because Bisharp is named after the bishop, the piece from chess, and they can only move in diagonals. So, yeah, I'm smart. Yeah, that's Bisharp. Really cool mon. Actually, one of my favorite Pokemon design-wise, not just because I play chess, but also because I think it's like really cool design-wise. It looks like a knight ready to go into battle. I mean, it's not a knight, it's a bishop. God, I'm such a fucking loser. Anyway, Bisharp, last member of the team. Fits the team. It fills the hole that I needed to fill in being a Pursuit Trapper. It's also another rocker if I want it to be, even though it's not the most reliable rocker in the world. It gives me another taunt user. It gives me another sort of physical wall breaker, another physical setup sweeper, which I kind of like, and it gives me another offensive check to some fairies. So that is going to finish up the team. That is the GBA Season 7 draft. I think I mentioned this earlier, but Jirachi is going to be our Z-move user, so it can use any Z-move it wants, bar the Omni Boost. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, let me know what you think of the team in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video. And if you're looking forward to the first match of the GBA, I am as well. We're going to be going up against Crimson Seabad, coach of the Detroit Steel Winds, who is back in the GBA after a season of hiatus, so I am super excited for that. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.